all day. We're very honored to have you here, and we apologize and we thank you, and I'm happy to finally recognize you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo and Ranking Member Guthrie and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on the challenges and opportunities of ALS research and development. My name is Dr. Jinsy Andrews, and I'm the Director of Neuromuscular Clinical Trials at Columbia University. I'm also a volunteer Board of Trustee member for the ALS Association. I also receive NIH funding for clinical trials, and I serve as a part-time staff physician at the James J. Peters VA Hospital, caring for veterans with ALS. My testimony today are my own personal views and not of the VA. First, I want to thank the committee for persevering through a very long day. And I'd like to also thank the members of the committee and the House for passing the Consolidated Appropriations Bill during the break between this hearings panel. The ALS community deeply appreciates this, and increasing funds to the NIH, including ARPA-H and other federal research programs, are critical for ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases. I also urge you to increase funding for the DoD ALS research program. I'm here today to ask for your help because the ALS research and development is not moving fast enough, as we heard today. The ALS community needs your help to ensure that the FDA accelerates drug development, approval, and access to effective new ALS treatments. When we all work together, we have seen the ability for regulatory flexibility and speed. Congress should urge the FDA to use their existing regulatory authority to move much more quickly on ALS drugs. Specifically, the ALS Association has urged Congress to pass the Act for ALS Act to provide increased access to experimental treatments for people with ALS while funding new research. The ALS Association has also urged Congress to increase federal funding for research, ALS research, and to develop a conditional approval pathway modeled on the successful experience of the European Union. I've cared for people with ALS and conducted clinical trials for over 15 years in both an academic and industry setting. In 2013, I attended a public hearing for ALS held by the FDA, where many people with ALS at that time shared that they're willing to take higher risks, that time is a luxury that they just don't have, and that they had limited access to experimental treatments. Many of those patients, including the ones that I cared for, have since died. Time is of the essence. People with ALS urgently need effective new treatments. The FDA should be fully funded, fully staffed, and provided the regulatory authority they need to be fast, effective, and transparent for ALS clinical trials and drug approvals. Making approval decisions about promising therapy is never easy, especially in fatal diseases. But year after year, people with ALS have shared with the FDA, with Congress, and basically anyone else who will listen, that they're willing to accept greater risks, that anything that retains function, that provides more time, is meaningful to them, and that access to new treatments, including ones prior to FDA approval, is a top priority because right now there is no cure for ALS. There are also opportunities for manufacturers to make ALS clinical trials more efficient, more impactful, and more respectful for people with ALS. That includes expanded access to experimental therapies, which is not often provided by the pharmaceutical companies that are in the ALS space, typically because they're small or they don't have resources. And in contrast, big pharma companies that may be able to provide expanded access don't invest in ALS programs until they're de-risked. All clinical trials should be accessible to people with ALS by including open-label extensions and expanded access, which, if it's designed appropriately, could collect data regarding safety and tolerability. Additionally, I'm going to emphasize what Dr. Sokovich emphasized. Providing expanded access to patients outside of a clinical trial can be accomplished without impeding the completion of a clinical trial in ALS. We have done this, and we're doing this by offering expanded access to patients who are not clinical trial eligible. We stagger the enrollment of clinical trials and offering expanded access, and clinical trial participants should be assured that they have access to the experimental therapy after they've completed their participation in the formal clinical trial. There's a perception out there that ALS is rare, but we've all shared stories today about how we have been touched by neurodegenerative diseases, so I don't have to explain much more than that. It's important for us to act now. Thousands of people with ALS are dying today and don't have options. Any one of us are at risk of developing ALS or neurodegenerative disease. Our veterans who serve this country are twice as likely to develop ALS than the general population. When someone is told they have ALS, they have a 0% chance of survival. Pancreatic cancer even has a 5% chance of survival. Let the people that get diagnosed with ALS not have to face what people with ALS are facing today, a lack of access to treatments. You have the power to change that, and especially I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and of course, thank